the opportunity which I got it to write the last chapter, actually, I should thank you. But to introduce myself, my name is Kumar Rajagopalan. I country head for DISYS India Private Limited. It was a very small start in 2012. Now we are into $1 billion company. We made it into 5 major cities in India at this point of time: Pune, Bangalore, Noida, Chennai, and Hyderabad. And we are also expanding very rapidly. Probably by next year, same time, we will be crossing close to 2,000 people in India. Globally, like we are close to about like 3,000 people. In fact, all the Fortune 50 companies in the world are our. That's the growth which we have been going through over the years. And I would rather say to connect with this book and for the journey which I have it, it more or less like it coincides with that. Because the reason I say it is like our management is more closer to kind of a human values and also provide a lot more insights into like how to take care of the people first, leave alone rest of the things later. And that was one of the reasons why the success of this organization also depended a lot. We integrated 3 to 4 companies over the year, 3 or 4 years. And each of these integrations, in fact, created value internally for our company and for all the employees those who joined. And again, I would provide the success of that one is also because the values which we kind of imbibe, the culture which we kind of build on top of it, the integration becomes easy. Otherwise, like it would have been a friction. Recently, last a month or so, we also integrated one of the largest in the staffing world, and we got into one of the companies called Signature. And to tell you is like this is a signature mark for us too, because it's bigger than our size, but at the same time, like the culture of the companies for the company integrated so well. So all these things, it's probably because like more than anything, even our CEO, Mahfuz Ahmad, President Maruf Ahmad, they imbibe a lot of people. And it was very clear that like the employees' morale is very important for any of the organization. And we have been so tuned to that from top. Thanks to you, because this book also brought us a lot of insight and the way which I kind of read it differently than all others, because you asked me to write the last chapter. So it was in a way that like I cannot skip through any of the chapters I have to go through. And second thing is when I wanted to reproduce that one, I have to kind of go through my own experiences, because all these years, like when we build something in India, it is always like kind of a challenging task. One is the local people, and second thing is like every boss in US, you need to satisfy them. So that like there is a amount of sacrifices which you need to go through to kind of build any organization. And this gave me a lot of perspective, because like what you leave at the end of the day is just not an entity. It's beyond that. The culture which is part of it. Good. And I would probably read it again and again, though I wrote my last chapter, but still I will read it.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar.
Just to kind of one last addition to it, like you asked me, okay, so 1 second. So one last thing which I need to tell you is my hobbies. It's always been, I think you and I, we have been talking about it, has always been the books and books and books. So over the years, I think we discussed, debated, also went through a lot of books. I would probably say is like kind of some of the things I had chance to kind of discuss with most of the people like you. That sharpened most of the spiritual thought. Otherwise, like it would have been very difficult. So actively, I can say that like I like the spiritual books, and I like every kind of spiritual book, not just like any specific religion. That includes Tamil literature as well as the English.
Wonderful. It's really nice to be chatting with you, because this book has been built up over more than a year, and you have been part of the journey for a good amount of time. Thanks again for that last chapter and the time that you have invested in reading this book. Of course, we resonate many of these values. instead of actually you interviewing me, I thought of asking if I can interview you because you seem to know so much about this book as much as maybe I would do. Which chapter would be your favorite out of the 9? Of course, 10th being the last chapter. Which would be your favorite and why, if I can ask you before I answer any of your questions?
Okay, so I would rather take it as the complete book as one chapter. There's a reason why I said, and then I will come back to this specific chapter. The reason I said, because the way I think I also gave my commentary that way. When I read through that one, it started with the karma, which is basically your past and present. And then you started with Durva initially. He is like kind of Prakallada, even a child before born. And then to Durva, the child is like kind of growing up, and all the way up to Vishwamitra. It is like kind of somebody who reads the Indian mythology, probably like they can understand. And the corporate yogi also, it travels from one step to another step to another. So it is the evolution process. You also took care of somebody who is about to be born to all the way up to somebody who has reached their level. And still, it's a work in progress. It's still not like the finality which you said, it is the main thing. It is still a work in progress. It's not done. So, and the most important thing which you mentioned is like God made everybody kind of not, I would say, quote unquote, complete rounded personalities. Still some element of error which is there within every one of us to make us like kind of grow and close that gap. And that's important. And Vishwamitra is an apt example for that. So despite like he goes into that level, again he falls down and then comes back. So that happens for any CEO for that matter, any entrepreneur for that matter, because the success never carries the success to the next level. Sometimes there is a big fall is also, but how do they carry to get up and then move forward from there? It's an important step. So I think I would say the last chapter is always a year to be.
Because which was a summary of all the chapters. When I wrote the book, one of the thoughts which I always had is, though I met several CEOs, and some of them in their own view sort of have made it, only to find that the snake and ladders game catches up with them, as you rightly pointed out. And many of them who have fallen by the wayside, including some of the Fortune 100 company CEOs, who find they have lost on the value side, not necessarily on the performance side. And even those who lost out on the performance, the root cause is on the value side and not on the, it's just a reflection. The performance is a symptom and the effect, the cause being elsewhere. And this is what actually made me to deep dive into that subject, which anyone who has chosen a spiritual path would understand well. There are a lot of dots which we don't seem to really see it and how they connect. And being a spiritual CEO is what actually makes a CEO really complete. I don't think you can just fly on performance alone anymore. And in the middle of 90s, there was a Harvard study which is commissioned to purely study on the spiritual impact of being a leader. And I had access to that paid research paper long ago, and that made me think a lot. I quoted from that in this book as well. Being spiritual is not being a defeatist or giving up on the performance of the organization. Many of the CEOs I have spoken to while this book was being built, they all asked the same question that you also asked, or rather you answered in one of your videos that you had made. That word sounds like an oxymoron. Spiritual CEO typically sounds a little bit, as they would say, sissy stuff, not made for people who are going to perform, take the organization leapfrogging. And one of the comparisons I drew in the book is between the army of the Kauravas and the army of the Pandavas. Though the Kauravas had everything going in their favor, Pandavas were hardly 1/10 their size in terms of numbers, were still able to stay united and go because they thought and they firmly believed that they were standing on the side of Dharma. And that seemed to galvanize them in a way in which the same thing what happened in the movie 300. With just about 300 people, that army, how they were able to withstand the onslaught from down below of almost 30,000 people. all this repeatedly brings us back to the question, even in this pandemic time, where we keep speaking about purpose over profit. It's chronicled well in HBR studies and everywhere else, but do CEOs really take cognizance of the fact that purpose matters more than profit? We are all driven by this one unilateral view of profit and more profits and more profits, even at the cost of the health of people, which is what drove me to write that body, mind, soul chapter as well. Do we really understand that the human who is behind each organization, the humans, actually matter more? This is a question which, for me, it's always a fascinating subject, because part of the consulting journey, whenever I interact with CEOs, from beginning to end, it's ad nauseum. The discussions are around only how to improve top line and bottom line. How much ever you work hard, they say, Prakash, it's good, but can we do it next financial year? Even altering or touching the DNA and all that. So how would you see this? You did share the success story of DISYS and how you have helped to build values. How would you see it being adopted uniformly across some of the top-notch organizations? What would be your recommendation, Mr. Kumar?
It is. So the one thing which I would say, most of the clients whom we work also, I would say one of the CTO of a large clients we are servicing in India right now, globally, he came down. In fact, I presented him the heartfelt to him. So one of the questions which he asked me is like kind of, okay, so I could see all the posters out here in your organization, and most of the things. There is one underlying factor which is like the value of students. I never see two things in your presentation. You never said any of the people as a resource. You said people. You're like very, very conscious of making them as like people with a life behind them. And second is like when you presented your case study also, is like, you know, what kind of HR practices you use. You said life as one of the themes and how it values inside the organization. So with all quote unquote, like I could see your organization kind of value the people. And that's one of the reasons like it's becoming a very successful with us partnering. So this is not just one team. Whoever has come to India for that matter. Initially, they all had this problem. Coming to India is like kind of what kind of environment you would be in, where they will take care of us, whether it will be good to kind of have that. So the first thing is Aditi Devoga, right? Like to bring here and give them with all the things which they need, the values which they, whatever which you have it, and treat them with a lot of respect. So at the end of the day, when they go, everybody felt that like, I don't want to go back. Like actually, I would rather stay back here with you guys. So that's the main success story behind any of the clients which we take. Because when the value is like typically human to human, not just the numbers. You say like you can close all the L1 tickets at 99.99%. Yes, it's a number. Of course, like that is what's being paid for, and everybody is looking for that one. But beyond that 99.99%, there is a human element. How the ticket is being sold.
Yes.
If everybody who's going to have who's working with the client organization is going to kind of have a very rough discussion each and every day and say like I've sold 99% tickets, still he's not going to retain you. But they think that like, okay, you provide a value, and everyone, whoever is talking from there politely and answering all the questions while the tickets are being solved, but also it's like my problems are being fixed. That's the main thing which every organization looks at it. And as you rightly pointed out in the book also, it's like kind of one of the main challenges is the culture building inside the organization. And when it comes from top to bottom, everybody follows the same culture. It's not that like, okay, for one person I will show this kind of a face, for the other person I'll show a different kind of face. So long as like everybody is in a, I would say one face, then it becomes the success is automatically guaranteed. That's the main factor.
The challenge.
I would rather ask you a question.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Mr. Kumar.
Yeah, so I would rather ask you a question. So in this will see you, right? The one major element which I kind of wanted to check with you there are three instances you mentioned characters. One is, of course, Dhruva has one character. The second is Vishwamitra as a second character. And Janak Maharaj is a third character. So for somebody who has not read it, I will just give you background about it. Dhruva is a person who kind of went to forest search for what is in it and who am I kind of a stuff. And finally he learned about it, even very young age, became a successful. So he came back, became a successful. Vishwamitra was a very successful, and he then left everything and search of who am I. So after that, he never came back. Janak is always like kind of a person who inherited the kingdom, and he is always a king, born king. And then he also had that spiritual parallelly going on, and became a most spiritual CEO. So, whom, according to you, is the best CEO suited material to kind of lead an organization? May not be, you have not touched that kind of a correlation, but you have provided the story. All people. I just picked up.
I have picked up several stories, in fact, from the Indian mythology, is to mainly show that maintaining a balance even while being extremely successful on any front is not only impossible, but actually now a necessary, essential item in day-to-day life. See the number of deaths that's happening around us, the kind of news that we keep getting, the kind of changes that are sweeping the industries which were kings yesterday are suddenly swept off because they are not part of the COVID or post-COVID scenario. All these things repeatedly brings us back to one thing is that we need to have a higher purpose, some of which needs to be our inner call, the North Star, as we would say. And many of these characters that you said, Dhruv or Prahalad or Janak or Vishwamitra, they all actually epitomize the balance between external success and internal value. They all struggled. It's not that they got it. You see, Janak maybe got it through Ashtavakra. Each one had their own calling. For Vishwamitra, he had the biggest of enemies, which nobody would want to have, Vasishtha, but he managed. He finally took him as a person who was going to teach him. And each one of us keep getting this call from time to time, except that we just muffle it and then don't actually listen to it and act on it. But each of the stories that I have picked up, each one is a gem by itself. And it only goes to prove that you don't need to have a weak back to be a spiritual person. In fact, you need a lot of strength and character. See, it's quite easy to run after money, and all of us know how to do it, running a business either as part of it or as an advisor like us from outside. But finally, to stand up for values, you need a lot of guts. And for that, you have to be spiritually inclined, irrespective of your religious faith, irrespective of even whether you believe in God or not. Spirituality here, when I say, I refer to as your personal and organizational vision aligning with the world vision, which would guarantee peace, happiness, and all-round purpose-driven growth. My purpose could be different. I could be chasing realization of God. Your purpose could be making someone happy. Somebody else's purpose could be giving knowledge back to the world, whatever it may be. If that expression is allowed, which is what I think many of our mythological stories teach us as well. And this is something which is slowly coming back into the corporate world today, either by necessity or otherwise. And these stories in some way, you see, I don't know if books by themselves can bring any change in a human, but it inspires someone to think in lines which they haven't thought before. And periodically, somebody I was talking to a week back was asking, would you think, Prakash, that this book would bring a change? I said, certainly not, but they are like milestones on your road journey. It just indicates the change that you need to look at. It just tells you, okay, I'm here if you want, see if something makes out. And see, books have a very nice way of connecting to humans, because unlike a coach or a mentor who tells you on the face, books are there on the couch and you read it, take it, read it, and you find something popping up. It's up to you to introspect, ruminate, and go ahead and change. So I find that many of these stories, that's why I've used extensively storytelling techniques as part of the book instead of a direct kind of advice or whatever you want to call. And I do see that many people seem to resonate with that.
But in fact, storytelling, and also at the end you put the action points and things like that.
Yeah.
So it was a short synopsis of each of the chapters.
That's a summary for those who want to skip the chapters. There are a lot of people who have very short time. No, they always say, "Hey, please tell me what is in this chapter." So, okay, you can't read the chapter, go to the last page.
No, but I would say that like this book, like they should read the chapters because like it's more interesting to kind of go through.
Then it makes sense. Then it makes sense for them to read at the end, and they might even come back and say, maybe you missed 2 more points, which is a possibility, you know. It's of course getting released internationally in a couple of days' time. Already, people have started buying Kindle versions. They have started looking for even the hard copies across the world. The word somehow that spiritual CEO seem to, yeah, you are one of the early.
So I got a first copy.
you are one of the first ones to get. Of course, I got mine much ahead of everyone else being the author. And anyway, I would like to thank you for really penning that last chapter, which was wonderfully written. And of course, it also gave you the chance of reading the book ahead of anyone else. And is there any closing comments you would like to offer, Mr. Kumar?
No, in fact, again, I wanted to thank you for the last chapter and for allowing me to write that one. More than anything, like I wanted to see some sequel for this one. So, because the reason I'm saying is like it's more you have touched it in a nicer way, but like the detailed version of it is what I look at it. So the 9 chapters are not enough. It's typically like I would rather detailing as part of it, not just from the storytelling point of view, but like the CEO per se. Okay. There are certain some more depth which is kind of can be illustrated with the corporate scenarios too, okay. which is like kind of as I think one of the suggestions in this book was kind of publish it for the MBA schools, yeah. And I would say is like kind of even at the research. So for that, like you may kind of I know like kind of you have a lot more in your stream, so you can bring out the second volume, which is much bigger than the first volume.
It's almost like becoming a franchisee model, you know. I mean, you know that once a book becomes a hit, you'll have a sequel and a sequel and sequels. Originally, my thought was to write it as a much bigger book, but when I spoke to the publishers and all, they all said, maybe you can keep it light and thin because these days people don't have too much time to read. So I brought it down to a read which you can finish in about 2 hours time roughly. If you take the book and go end to end, if you're a fast reader, in 2 hours, you should be able to finish reading. Of course, sequels are already in place. I've started developing the framework and I'm very sure that I would come to you for help there as well.
Yeah. So every university, I am a firm believer because through national also connecting through some of the schools. Every university needs to have, because the MBA schools especially,
yes,
the CEOs, people look at the CEO as only the CEO at the highest level. Just to kind of give you one example, Mahabharata war, Dharmaputra did not lead the army. It was like the king of Drupad's son who led the army. Because like the general has to be somebody who is experienced. And all these 5 Pandavas, like kind of they were running after the forest and other things. They never had the experience of handling the big army. So they had individually all the capabilities, but like the Dishyatima who was leading it because he knows all the formations and things like that. So similarly, the CEOs, like kind of everybody thinks who's only at the top. Every department, every level, there is a CEO and there is a general who is playing the role of it. And it has been illustrated in this book, but like universities also need to bring in that topic. Yes. And I would like you to write much more detail.
I would do that, Mr. Anyway, thank you for that last chapter. For viewers, Mr. Kumar, whom you see on screen, is the one who wrote the last chapter in the book. Very well written, where he gives a synopsis. In case you want to go first, go to the last chapter, read it, and then pick which chapter you want to read, come back into the book and read it. Thanks a lot, Mr. Kumar. Thanks for the time, and it's really a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, sir.